Welcome to the Theoretical Neuroscience Podcast. I am the host, Gaute Einvoll. Back in the days, mathematical models in neuroscience were typically quite small, maybe a single or a handful of mathematical equations with a fairly low number of model parameters. The models were often designed to answer a single research question, and after this had been answered, maybe as part of a master or a PhD project, the model was commonly put on a shelf not to be used again. However, following development of new experimental techniques, measuring neural structures and activity in ever more detail, combined with ever stronger computers, some of the newer models are much larger and more detailed and complicated. One such model is the comprehensive Potjans-Diesmann network model for a column of visual cortex. It was made by the PhD student Tobias Potjans in a group of Markus Diesmann in Jülich in Germany. Published in 2014, it contains about 80,000 integrated fire neurons connected according to rules observed in various neurobiological experiments. Being biologically very detailed, it took several years to construct for the industrious PhD student, but unlike most models, it has been reused and applied in many different contexts in the years since. It has been modified in various ways to explore many other aspects of network dynamics than what was the focus of the original paper. It has also been used as a building block for spatially more extensive cortical network models, including the multi-area models developed by the group of Sasha van Albada, discussed in podcast number 4. Further, it has become an important benchmarking model for evaluating the performance of both hardware and software when it comes to large-scale network simulations. And today, it is very much alive and kicking. In 2024, on the 10th anniversary of the publication of the Potjans-Diesmann model, today's guest, Hans-Eckhard Plesser, took the initiative to have a workshop in Aachen to reflect on the reasons for the model's success, the its effect on computational neuroscience and technology development, and the perspectives this offer for the future of computational neuroscience. A report summarizing the observations made by the workshop participants was published in the journal Cerebral Cortex last year and is discussed in this podcast. Hans Eckhart is a professor of informatics at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences and a good colleague of mine. He's one of the lead developers of the network simulation tool Nest and has, over the last years, worked a lot on how to improve reproducibility and what flippantly can be called modeling hygiene in computational neuroscience. In experimental biology, including neuroscience, researchers often find it difficult to repeat results which are republished in even the high-profile scientific journals. This is, of course, worrisome, as a key idea of the whole scientific enterprise is that scientists should build on each other's research findings. There are probably several reasons for this problem, commonly referred to as the replicability crisis. Maybe some scientists feel so much pressure to publish exciting results that they sometimes are too slack on scientific rigor. Another reason might be the high complexity of living systems, making it difficult to properly control for external factors, so-called confounding variables. If, for example, a new study on mouse behavior was done in the mornings, it might give different results than an older study done in the afternoons if the time of day turned out to matter for the questions asked. But also computational neuroscience have a replicability challenge to deal with. How can this be? Math is math. 7 times 8 is always 56, whether you compute it in the morning or in the afternoon. Well, one problem is that when we try to reproduce previously published modeling results, we often find that not all necessary model parameters are listed. Another common problem is that the listed parameters describing a computed figure are incorrect, in the sense that use of these parameters do not actually give the curves shown in the figure. Actually, both times when we in our group tried to write our own computer code to explore a published model, we ran into one or both of these problems. And these were quite simple models, so I'm pretty sure that the problem was not that we did a mistake in our coding. One way to fix this particular problem is to share the computer code used to generate the results in the paper, so that new users can rerun the code and check that they get the same results. But that doesn't solve the problem by itself. What if the computer code itself has errors and does not correctly implement the model described in the paper? Then there is little use in running the same code on your own computer to get the same incorrect results. When reusing a code developed by others, one can of course go through the code in detail and try to check for bugs, but this is a difficult and often strenuous job. The best and safest thing to do is to write your own code from scratch using only the model info in the paper. Then, if the results from running your new code agrees with the results of the code from the paper, you have good reason to believe that the code does what it's supposed to. A more subtle problem is that the results from running a code in some situations might depend on the computer and operating system. If this could be an issue, one should try to run the same code on a different computer and check if you get the same results. In the podcast, we first talk about the reproducibility challenges in computational neuroscience before we move on to talk about the Potjans-Diesmann model. These topics are connected. One of the reasons for the success of the Potjans-Diesmann model was the deliberate effort of the authors to make the model available for the community. They not only made their simulation code available, they also facilitated its use by proper documentation of it and making it available in dedicated model sharing and exploration platforms such as Open Source Brain and ModelDB. If you want to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/theoretical neuroscience podcast and choose a membership of your liking. For example, at the cost of $1 per month. As a member, you will get access to a video version of the podcast recordings, as well as transcripts of each episode. And note that there is a 7-day free trial period when you sign up. I also have a YouTube channel called Theoretical Neuroscience Podcast, where you also can watch the videos. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all of you who are already Patreon supporters. Thanks a lot. I will be most grateful if more join in to help me fund the production of the podcast, even if you're not too interested in looking at the videos. But I also appreciate all the other listeners, and I hope that all of you can help spread the word about the podcast to other people in the community, on social media, or otherwise. Okay, here is Hans Eckart. Yes, welcome to the Theoretical Neuroscience podcast, Hans Eckart Presser.
Thank you.
So, we are all aware of the replicability crisis in experimental neuroscience, right? That it's difficult to reproduce findings, maybe also some important findings in important papers from back in the days, if you try to do it again. But there is also maybe not a replicability crisis, but at least a replicability problem in computational neuroscience. And of course, reproducibility or replicability is essential for building scientific knowledge. So what is how is it a replicability problem in computational neuroscience?
The typical example is that you have you find a paper describing some simulation experiment someone has done with interesting findings. You would like to build on that paper. So you try to implement that model yourself, or maybe you ask a student to give it to a student to re-implement it. And then in a few cases, you might actually succeed based on the information that is provided in the paper. One thing you might quite early encounter is that you discover that some information is actually missing some details. So then you either have to make a choice yourself, or hopefully you can still get in contact with the original authors and they remember what they have done. Then with the detailed, or with that information complete, might be able to actually rebuild the model and simulate it. And then the question is whether you get the same results or not. And there are a number of cases where you obtain different results. And then again, the question is what has happened. I encountered one example very early in my career where one could clearly see that just by doing the paper and pencil mathematics, that the results in a paper were impossible. But there, someone clearly had made a little programming mistake. I mean, there it wasn't a significant problem; it was just a detail that was off.
Yeah.
But
So if we go to this, I think you had this book chapter together with Sharon Crook and Andrew Davison, right?
Yes.
Talking about this sort of, the different issues with, because replicability is not replicability. There are different types of replicability, and so I think in your paper or in this book chapter, then of course this will be linked to at the homepage of this episode. But the first, there's like 4 levels of replicability, reproducibility,
So one thing is, and I have another little paper on that, is this terminology of replicability and reproducibility.
Okay.
And their different fields of science have chosen exactly opposite definitions for these terms.
Oh no!
So this one paper I have there is about the this confused terminology.
Okay, I will link to that as well.
Yes,
to confuse the readers even more.
Well, maybe it can sort out a little bit. What I regret a bit after having published that paper was that I did not engage more strongly about this in the community, because at least in large parts of the community now, they have adopted the opposite terminology of or interpretation of these terms from what I had advocated. But
if you go back to your definition, then
yes.
So
and that is what we have in this book chapter you mentioned, where we first define 3 levels of replicability, and so the lowest level we call internal replicability. And there, the idea is that you are within your own lab and you just in your own lab want to run your code again. And that might sound like a very simple thing, but it is actually a very challenging task. And then the question also always is, and that's a difficult scientific question often, what exactly is a criterion for a successful replication? And if we look at the field that I'm working on most actively, so spiking neural network simulations, we are often looking at balanced excitatory inhibitory networks that are operating in a regime that is somewhere not too far from the edge of chaos, which means that it becomes very sensitive to small perturbations. So you can run a simulation and look at the firing patterns of the 100 neurons or 10,000 neurons you have in your network. And then you manipulate one neuron. You just change a membrane potential by a femtovolt or so. And then nothing much happens. But after a while, after, I don't know, 10, 20 milliseconds, suddenly the firing pattern completely changes, because you had this butterfly flapping its wing and influencing the overall dynamics.
Femtovolt is essentially just numerical noise.
That is numerical error, exactly. And then if you say, okay, my relevant quantities are average firing rates, interspike interval distributions, coefficients of variation, correlation functions or so. look at those measures, they will not be affected, but the precise firing pattern is affected. And there we as so since we often assume that what well written scientific software does is reproducible, we expect that we get exactly the same firing patterns out. And now things could happen. For example, when Apple switched from Intel to CPUs to their own Apple Silicon, there might have been very small differences in the numerics, and they could induce exactly these type of differences. And suddenly you see, oh, I can't reproduce things anymore. What does that mean for me? I was once a reviewer on a paper where the other reviewer did an absolutely admirable job, because there people had looked actually at quantitative measures in an all-to-all network, and could show that there, for global measures, you had differences depending on whether you run it on Windows or on Linux or on different hardware architectures. And for one difference, this other reviewer traced it down to the fact that the last bit in the value of an exponential function was off at time step 598 in the simulation,
That's
or was different under Windows than under Linux.
a very diligent reviewer indeed.
An extremely diligent colleague,
Okay.
great admiration for that. But
So this
that
means
are things
that
that are just essentially completely out of your control as a scientist, and
so I guess that means
that
that
can
if you in your lab, then if you sort of may just upgrade your operating system, like a new version of like the Apple operating system, suddenly
Mhm.
you get slightly different things
Um,
on at least on the spike timing,
that
for example, in
could
that kind of.
lead to problems. I'm currently actually working with colleagues on a project where we thought we had everything under control, but then it turns out that if you use the typical scientific Python stack of packages, and you do not religiously record version numbers of the various packages you use, the numpys and scipys and so on, that can also get you into quite a lot of trouble. So the amount of diligence that is necessary to ensure this, let's say, internal replicability, push the button, get exactly the same results, is much higher than many of us think. And I think if one really wants to achieve that for software that one sort of accumulates in a laboratory, simulations one accumulates over a researcher's career, you almost have to go back to all of your software at least once a year and run that and see if it still gives you the results. If you wait for 5 or even 10 years, the probability that you will be able to even find out what went wrong will be quite
But I guess,
limited.
I guess, of course, this has to do with, in practice, the detailed spiking of each time of each spike is not really of scientific importance. It's more like this is some kind of global measure
Yes.
that matters. But at least one should be aware of these issues, right?
Yes. Yes.
What extent, at least the things you're interested in, should be reproducible when you upgrade your operating system, whatever.
Absolutely, and therefore it's also, I think, interesting to discuss in the beginning of a project, or reflect in the beginning of a project, about what are the important measures for us here. And
So that's internal replicability, which
yeah.
is sounds easy, but isn't necessarily. But
Mhm.
then it's external replicability, and that doesn't makes it even harder, probably.
That makes it a bit harder. So there, the idea is that the someone else, a reader of your paper, for example, pulls the software that you have published together with your paper, and reruns the model on their systems. But the idea is they are still using the same tools, and can divide the question there. Should they then use the same tools but rewrite some of the code, or but I would include now in external replicability, also that someone pulls your code from GitHub or where you have posted it, and runs it on their systems and gets the same results that you had. And then you just get a bit more variability in. And you also no longer have this knowledge that everyone in the lab knows that you have to do. I mean, it's probably even more in, I think, in real experimental labs, one knows that there is that one bucket you need to kick in order for everything to work.
Exactly.
There are similar things in computer science as well. There is quite a bit of implicit knowledge and practice in groups that wouldn't come across GitHub. So it's a little step up in challenge from internal to this external
So, yeah, of course,
replicability. But the
this.
real challenge then comes with the cross replicability, where the idea is, okay, now we rebuild the same model from scratch, maybe using a different tool. Maybe you had a model that was implemented by a researcher in a low-level programming language, so written in C or so, and now you want to implement that using a dedicated simulation software such as Nest or Brian. And you then observe that maybe you succeed, but you might also run into difficulties.
But then
And
you sort of convert, maybe you convert this convert code from one language to another, right? Because independent reproducibility is something else that you're coming to next, I guess.
that is the reproducibility then. And I think it will always be or very often be a difference of degrees. So I mean, if you find an interesting paper, even if they have their code available, and you want to now transfer that to a different scheme, for example, turn C code into Nest simulation scripts, you would not read the C code line by line and then try to transfer that directly into Nest. You would read the paper, get the ideas, try to identify which neuron models match which connection patterns you have in there, and then try to implement that in Nest, and at the same time have an eye on the C code to find out some of the details that might be missing in the paper.
Huh.
The main point is that you try to redo exactly the same things, but now using different tools. And there are quite a number of examples where in such a process one then discovered information that was missing, but also information that maybe was incorrect or at least misleadingly presented in the original publication.
So this is maybe like almost like the gold standard. This is what would be gold standard of replication reproduction. Right? If you're able to do that, then you get
Yes.
same results. Then you can sort of
Yes.
trust that this seems to be. Then
Yes.
then you are in good shape.
Yes, yes, and if you have done that, you can also submit that to the Rescience journal, so an open online journal for reproduction of or redoing of published results, and they want to have your implementation and a paper that describes how you got there and how well the agreement now is. So, and that,
because
and that journal actually lives entirely on GitHub, I think. And it's free of charge to publish there. So might also be a nice thing if you start working on a model, want to take that over to get some credit out of it.
I think that's also true, and also if I mean, we have been trying to use, like most computational neuroscientists, some point have tried to use other previously published models, and if you know that something has been re-implemented or reproduced properly and as demonstrated in like a paper in Rescience, then it's much like it gives it much more confidence in actually that the model is actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's certainly a good recommendation. I think we have. I've actually been involved in one paper in Rescience already
Mhm.
some years ago. So, but I think this problem. I remember when I started sort of supervising master students back in the
Mhm.
days. This thing of trying to make a model based on what was described in the paper was something we tried a couple of times, and I think we failed failed once because obviously things were missing.
Mhm.
So you have actually done some work with a previous PhD student, Eileen Nordli, on trying
Mhm.
to make like standardized ways to describe models so that you don't forget anything or that it's
Yes.
easily
Yes.
accessible.
Yes. So we proposed sort of a standardized set of tables to be used for model descriptions. And that was in 2009, 2010, that paper came out. And that has had an effect on the practice in the community. Um, since it's human formatted tables, they are there's still some level of variation. Not everyone uses them, but I would say that has had a positive impact
Mm,
on how models are presented. But when it comes to complex models, these tables can also again become pretty long. And it's also understandable that they are often in supplementary material. Um, and I would assume that there are also such tables around that contain mistakes, but at least you have a reasonably accepted and standardized way of presenting this material,
mm.
or network details and structure.
Yeah, we've been
But
using the Nordli tables in several of our
yeah,
papers.
yeah,
Yeah, as we call them. Yeah.
yes,
Mm.
and uh, but we also had a paper in 3 years ago with Johanna Senk, who is now in Sussex, as the lead author, where we again looked at how are models specified and how are they described in the literature. I think then we picked about 30, between 30 and 40 larger network models um, from the literature and databases. And there we again found a lot of them were implemented in low-level programming languages, which gives the authors a lot of flexibility. But it also means for those who want to understand what the models really do, that you have to analyze the models at the level of individual if statements and mathematical operations, and not at the level of the concept of let's say, a leaky integrate and fire neuron, or a certain type of projection pattern between neuronal
Mm.
populations.
Mm. So there's still some room for improvement.
There is certainly a room for improvement, and I strongly encourage colleagues really to consider uh, high level simulators, simulation tools that are available, and to build on the concepts that are available there in the form of individual neuron models, connectivity patterns,
So
and
just make
such.
sure that low level languages, that's like C or C++
Yeah, Python,
and maybe the
Julia.
MATLAB, Python, and then high level is sort of like Nest, the one that you are involved in development, and Neuron. Is that what you mean
Yes,
by high level?
yes, yeah. Uh, high level in the sense that you have tools that that represent concepts from neuroscience. So if you do something in C and Python, in MATLAB, um, there you only have this level of I mean, there you're working on the level of uh, basic programming concepts, loops, branches, classes, and so. But those you have no neuroscience concepts in there. While in the higher level simulators, you can work directly with neuroscience concepts, and in that way, you are a lot more expressive. And I mean, there is just so much we can have in our mind at the same time. If you have to, I mean, if I give you code where I once just call a function that takes the minimum of two numbers, and that's nicely called minimum, you can see from that one line what it's doing. If I give you basic Python code or C code that determines with the help of an if statement the minimum of two numbers, you'll really have to think about what is going on. You have to follow the different paths through to see what this code does, and that makes it just a lot more difficult to work with that.
I think sort of like I mean, like when I sort of the typical way it used to be, like when I during my PhD or whatever, then I made some computer code that was not used by anyone else later, and it was certainly not written to be. Well, it was written for me to understand them, so that I could sort of go back and make sure that I knew what I was doing, but not. But they were never used really by other people. And now, if you want to then go from like the code that you use for your own project, maybe your own PhD or your own masters, and to actually contribute to make it something that can be used in sort of used by others in sort of what's called workflows, where they can actually take this code and use it in combination with other code or whatever to add it to your project. So what are the typical reasons that this doesn't happen, that you don't that these scripts that you make are not useful for can be used in sort of like larger workflows later on?
Creating something that works for you and is something very different than creating something that works for others on a large scale and on a long time scale as well. So when you write your own code, you have a lot of implicit knowledge about that code. Also knowledge that will disappear if you come back to your own code a year or 2 years later and try to understand exactly what it's doing there. That might give you a hard time. And if you want to share your code with others, you will have to and in such a way that they can really use it and work with it. You will have to put in a lot of documentation. You will have to make your software robust against user errors. And you will want to provide some level of flexibility so that people can actually adapt things to their own modeling plans. Then you should ideally also take some responsibility for maintaining the code, being available for questions from users. And I think one typical problem is that you have a lot of the hands-on work done by graduate students. And when that graduate student then completes their studies and moves on to other things, if they stay in science as postdocs, might still be a good chance that you can get hold of them, unless they switch fields completely. but many or most PhD students actually, in the end, move on to industry and will very quickly not be available anymore. And uh, if you then only have the supervisor to talk to, who might have done a very great job as a supervisor and given a lot of good advice to the student, but has not been deeply involved in the code development or review, it might be difficult to understand what happened and to sort
Mm.
of move on.
Mm.
So that is a bit of a yeah.
Mm. There's also this thing that when I sort of made, I mean, that you end up making versions of of the of your code, and you call it new one and new two and really new, and there are like there are
Yes.
like better ways of doing this, like with this version controls and
Yes.
GitHub and things like
So
that. So there's
I mean,
also yeah,
we have learned quite a lot since we were graduate students,
yeah,
and I mean, but that's also actually interesting for the Nest simulator, for example. We have had code development there under version control since 1996.
okay,
That really goes back to my graduate student days. So I wasn't involved then, but for some software, you have this very long-term development, which I would hope also would instill trust. And another interesting point, actually, in neuroscience, is, and there we had a joint paper in 2019, I think, in Neuron on
mm,
brain simulations,
mm,
uh, is that in neuroscience we can nicely separate often the model from the simulator. So you can take one and the same network model and you can run it on Nest and you can run it on Brian and you can run it on Neuron and other simulators. Um, and on any one of those simulators, you can also run any number of neuronal network or brain models, and that allows for a lot of flexibility. And there's even this Pine language for specifying, developed by Andrew Davison and colleagues.
that's
Um,
PYNN, right?
exactly.
PYNN.
Um, that allows you to write down a network specification and then you can run it without change by just swapping the back end um, um, on Nest or on the Brian 2 simulator or on Neuron. And if you have access to neuromorphic systems, you could even run it on the Spinnaker neuromorphic system or with some
Mm.
limitations on the Brain Scales
Yeah,
neuromorphic
so
system.
that's yeah. So that's obviously an advantage that you can sort of, if you write specify the model in these higher level languages, that you can run them on different like simulators. And then of course you also like to be able to share your models,
Mm-hmm.
and there are like these certain like model DBs. That's sort of like a curated repository, right? Where actually there's a person, I guess it's Thomas Morse or something, maybe it used to be him,
Mm-hmm.
who's actually going through the models and checking that they are working, right?
Yes, and another uh, um, comparable storage facility is open source Brain, where in the new version you can also execute most of the models directly, and you have the eBrains knowledge graph. So there are a number of repositories for models around.
Mm.
Yes.
So this is a good place to both like store your models and then also then get models from others.
Yes.
And for this, there's also this markup languages that are used to describe models. I'm always saying this like NeuroML, something called
Yes. Yes.
NeuroML, and you have
Yes.
also some markup languages more towards maybe other types of biological
Yes.
models.
So I mean, in systems biology, one has for a long time had markup languages such as SBML, the systems biology modeling language, or CellML. Um, and they have a long tradition of carefully curated model and model databases.
Mm.
In computational neuroscience, think we're still not there yet, which might be because our brain models are at times very complex. There are times at very different levels of uh, say resolution or abstraction. Maybe also because there have been limited efforts really to get the community organized on this point. You have specification languages such as NeuroML. They were Sharon Crook, Porrick Gleason, and a number of others have been very active that allow specifications in a declarative way using these markup languages.
Yeah.
And then you have also tools that allow you to visualize networks, for example.
Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, so there are certainly examples of models that has really been used and reused and taken on new lives and used in many different ways. And one excellent example of this is this Potjans-Diesmann network model for a column of visual cortex. I think you just well, you and you even had the people that worked on this Potjans-Diesmann network model. It was published first in 2014 as a paper. You had a meeting a couple of years ago where you actually focused on the model and the status like
Yes.
10 years after the Potjans-Diesmann
Yes.
network model, 10 years
Yes.
later. So this is certainly a model that not became a one-off thing. It became part of you call it even the scientific infrastructure.
Yes, exactly where we put the term of infrastructure, we can discuss a little later. Yes, so last April, so April 24, I was actually in a very nice place. So I was at the Käthe Hamburger Kolleg for Cultures of Research at the RWTH University in Aachen in Germany on sabbatical. And they gave me the opportunity to sort of step back a little bit from the daily hubbub and reflect, and then it fit nicely with the 10th anniversary of the paper publication of the Potjans-Diesmann model, or PD14 for short. So we organized there a workshop to look at the impact that model had on the community, or maybe one could even say on various communities. The reason, I think one important reason why this model had an
You should
impact.
start with telling about.
Yeah, I should maybe say something about the model. Yes.
Yeah, and then we'll get the listeners in on that. Yeah.
Yes. So if we go about 30 years back, yes, I think next year is actually the 30th anniversary of the Van Vreeswijk and Sompolinski science paper on balanced networks, where they for the first time showed that you could in networks have a fine balance of excitation and inhibition maintaining asynchronous activity. That had been a big topic of debate in the 90s.
We had a podcast number 34 with Nicolas Brunel discussing this.
Yeah.
So this is
and then Nicolas Brunel came with his paper in 2000, and there you had typically two populations, an excitatory and an inhibitory population. If you look at cortex, you have the well-known layer structure, and so various people started to look at incorporate or combining these balanced excitatory inhibitory networks with the layer structure, typically then saying, okay, we ignore layer 1 because that's only wires. We combine layer 2, 3 because they are not so distinct after all. And then we have layer 4, we have layer 5, layer 6. In each, we have an excitatory and an inhibitory population. All in all, we have 8 neuron populations, 4 excitatory, 4 inhibitory, with an approximately 80-20 ratio of neurons. Then we can build toy models from it. We can also ask, can we anchor these models in available anatomical and physiological data on neuron numbers and on connectivities between these different populations, with question of both number of connections and strength of connections. And that's what Tobias Potjans, under supervision by Potjans-Diesmann, embarked on in his PhD thesis. So he dug through a lot of literature. He found ways to compensate for biases that you have in various tracing methods, so that you could predict connection probabilities and weights on various length scales. Over a few years in the mid 2000s, built this model, which I think then was first presented in 2008 at the Society for Neuroscience annual meeting. And then came the work of publishing it. That was not easy at that point. So to persuade reviewers, in the end, it was out electronically in cerebral cortex in 2012. And at that time, we still had something called paper journals, which had volumes of fixed size. And so it took 2 years until the publisher found space in a paper volume. And that was the 2014 paper publication, then from which the PD14 name now comes. And that was also the reference point for our birthday seminar. And then when this paper version came out, the Diesmann group made a very important decision, namely to make this model in a well-tended version in Python and in Nest's historic SLY language available to the public, and to make it available also in not only as a download link on some slightly obscure lab page, but also make it available through resources such as open source Brain. And this conscious decision of making the model available with good documentation around it in carefully curated implementation, I think was an important reason why the model has been picked up and has both, I mean, it's been cited quite a lot of time. So as of last year, it had, I think, about 250 citations. But citations are one thing. What is really interesting is that it has been reused. So there are, I think, close to 50 publications now that actually took that model, either used it as a bit of a building block for other models, or made modifications on it, so that you really build new science on this existing model.
It's interesting, this idea of sharing, because I think modelers in general, they will be happy to share their models because they want people to use it, and well, experimentalists sometimes a bit skeptical because they felt that I put so much work into the, I don't know, experiment, and they don't want to be scooped to somebody else finding, maybe, I don't really know. But anyway, the key thing here is not only that they provided a link with all the code, they actually facilitated the reuse of it, which
Yes.
I think was a key thing. They actually put, because that's a bit of extra work,
yes,
right, to do this, and I think that's critical, right?
Yes, and they not only created an implementation in that was suitable for Nest, they also created one then in this PyNN language, which meant you could run the same model on other systems. And that was, for example, then used by the people who developed the Spinnaker neuromorphic system.
Yeah.
And over time also by people who developed simulation software for GPUs, for example. And that led to a very interesting additional effect of this model, namely that it became sort of the reference standard for both testing the viability or the correctness of various simulation tools and their performance. I mean, it's always very easy to write software that is super fast if it doesn't have to produce correct results. So before it makes sense to combine or to compare different simulators for speed, we want to make sure that they actually are producing the same results. And that has led to a lot of work, again, particularly from the Institute of Advanced Simulation #6 there at the Research Center Jülich, with Sascha von Albader, Potjans-Diesmann, and others, both at looking what are good quantities to, at a higher level, compare simulators. If I run the same model, particularly in this almost chaotic regime, on two different simulation softwares, I cannot expect to get exactly identical spike patterns out. And then I have to look at, okay, let's look at rates, let's look at rate distributions, let's look at CV distributions and other quantities. And over time, so it's sort of by 2018, 2019, they had worked out a little standard set of measures and started to use that to, say, quality control results from GPU simulators, or actually were the developers then of these simulators, who often in collaboration with these colleagues try to do validation of their softwares or neuromorphic systems. And then when you knew that you had could, there I would say now, reproduce with a completely different simulation system the behavior of the network, then you could start looking at both simulation time and energy consumption. And that kicked off what we call the micro race, and which is one of the, I mean, sometimes race to the bottom is negatively connoted, but in this case, it's actually positively, has positive connotations, because what we have seen over the last decade is that performance in simulating this Potjans-Diesmann model has improved with several orders of magnitude. And I think the current record holders are the group from Aachen with their NeuroX system, which is an FPGA-based system.
What
and
is FPGA? That's on field
programmable gate array. So these are essentially chips that have very flexible hardware. So you can, with special tools, program those chips to have whatever circuitry you want within certain limits. And so you can really, in a programmable way, create bespoke hardware that implements just the network model that you want to simulate. And there is a preprint by Johanna Senk and colleagues out on Archive, I think, that describes this this micro race.
So I mean, so this improvement in speed, or the speed up, that's a combination of hardware and software.
Yes.
Or mainly hardware, yeah.
No, it's been a combination. So it depends a little bit. I mean, if you come to these FPGA systems, it almost becomes difficult to say what is the software here, what is the hardware. When it comes to the Nest simulator, we have certainly benefited from the fact that we now have 128 core CPUs or so, but we have also worked very hard on the software side to make sure that we can actually make good use of these many CPU cores.
course, the model, if sort of like from the Potjans-Diesmann model, it has, well, it has 8 populations, and it
Mm-hmm.
has sort of a obviously some kind of biologically inspired, more biologically extracted connection patterns between neurons in these different layers, and a reasonable proportion between inhibitory and excitatory neurons. But
Mm-hmm.
all the neurons are the same, right? They have the same. The only thing that distinguish them is sort of what they whether they project inhibitory or excitatory
That's right.
synapses, right?
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
this is sort of like obviously. So this sort of highlights the maybe then the it highlights. Well, it's a model aimed to explore the effects of these synaptic connection patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and not so much on the neuronal variability. But this is of course something which has been explored
Mm-hmm.
later, right? I mean, it's like easy to extend this
Uh,
model, change, well, and
yes,
yeah, have more
and I mean,
different types of
so
interneural.
one thing is if you have your model in a the model set up in a good simulation software, then to differentiate neurons by at least replacing a fixed value where all neurons have a 10 millisecond membrane time constant to some distribution of membrane time constants is easy. Um, and I mean, I know that people are also working on, for example, having different types of interneurons in there to get somewhat closer to biological reality. There's also work on putting space into such a model. So in the Potjans-Diesmann model, I mean, you have these 8 populations, you have these 4 layers, but they are completely abstract. Um, and uh, there are extensions of the model by Johanna Senk, for example, where one said, okay, now we want to really spread those neurons out over 4 by 4 millimeters squared.
Mm.
And then have connectivity that is space dependent, so that you still, say, in a statistical sense, are homogeneous, but you have some structure
Mm. And it
in
also
there.
has been then extended to sort of multi-area models where this sort
Yes,
of like
yes,
this column Potjans-Diesmann model column in some sense
yeah,
model for column has been sort of replicated or like
yes,
put
yes.
around to
So,
maybe different areas.
yes. So there's some listeners may remember this famous diagram from the Velleman and van Essen 1991 paper that shows 32 visual areas in a hierarchy with connections in between. And the idea now was to represent each one of those 32 areas with essentially one clone of the Potjans-Diesmann model with adjusted neuron numbers and such, and then derive from anatomical and physiological data available, for example, from the COCO-MAC database and others. Connection patterns. So the question is, which areas are connected to each other? Which areas how strong are those connections? If you have long distance connections, how is actually the distribution of delays in there? Um, and then you end up with a model that has 32 times 8 populations, so 256. I think actually very few are missing because in some prefrontal cortex areas or so, there is some layers are extremely thin. Um, and then you have, in principle, 256 squared projections, so possibilities of connecting populations with each other. Not all of those are realized, but you need to find parameters for those. And then the network becomes so complex that actually tuning a spiking network by hand to find some stable working points becomes very complex. And so people like Hannah Bos and Moritz Helias, Tom Tetzlaff developed tools such as the, oh, what's the name now? MNT. So it has 4 letters. The acronym has 4 letters formed from MNT and T. I now don't remember exactly which one is double up. But that is a Python toolbox that allows you to do mean field analysis on such a complex network, so that you can get an idea of where stable parameter regions would be, and then you can test that in the spiking.
Of course, this is also a way to test sort of like that you, well, it's to test this like mean field theories in general. What can you sort of, what do you
Yeah.
miss when you do population density approaches,
Yes.
or
Yes.
other kind of mean
Yes.
field
Yes.
approaches,
Yes.
and
And there
so
one
it's
can have a sort of
mhm.
mutual stimulation. You can use the mean field theory to sort of find reasonable working points for your spiking networks, and then you can see how the spiking network dynamics
Mm,
differ from the mean field, what you get extra
mm.
by having spikes.
Yeah. So we have also used it in our group for compute as a test bed for computing local field for methods for
Mm-hmm.
computing local field potentials.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it has also been used for like some attention models, right? That was, I think, with some Japanese scientists. They had like whatever it's
Um,
like, I think they had like
yes.
two laterally coupled uh,
Yes, yes,
Potjans-Diesmann
yes.
models, and then like one affected the others. But I mean, that's
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
So
it.
the
Mm,
Fukai group, I think, yeah.
yeah, the
Similar.
usefulness of having this well defined and well described and easy to run
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
model is, I mean, it's a very natural thing to go to. I
Yes,
think
yeah.
when you want to explore something, like in our group we have used the Brunel network. Of course, it's a two population thing, and then the Potjans-Diesmann, which is an eight population thing. And now, but there are some limitations, right? That, for example, you don't get low frequency power is something that you don't sort of see so much in the, I think, which maybe reflects that it's actually this poor column living alone, so that they don't get this
Um,
low
yes,
frequency.
I
This
mean,
from
yeah.
our areas further away.
Um, yes, you have some challenges there. Some of that you can understand based also on this mean field analysis. Um, but there, I must admit that it's not my strongest side. So if I think there, it's better to have a podcast with I don't know, Moritz Helias or Tom
Well,
Tetzlaff
yeah,
or
I think we had a podcast with Sasha
yes,
about
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Yeah, Sasha van Albada.
exactly,
So I think that's true. But it's clear that if you have a longer time delays between different columns,
hmm
that will introduce lower frequencies, sort of like as a,
yeah, yeah,
that is sort of at least should be.
yes.
So and now there's also been then this some sense like more complicated models that like network models. I think it's like the blue brain network model
hmm hmm
from the so it's like EPFL,
hmm
and then which is sort of for like a neocortical column, and that's not a point neuron thing. It's
hmm
then it's the Allen model, the Bille model for the mouse visual cortex, and which both are in like two versions, one with biophysically detailed neurons, with like multi-compartmental neurons, other
hmm
with the
hmm
integrated fire models
yeah.
like Potjans-Diesmann. And then you have, I guess you were an opponent with the Antolik or something, no, in a
Yeah,
group of
yeah.
on a model there also, where they have
hmm
made sort of a large scale model. So now we have a set of these,
hmm
and there are also other large scale network models.
Yes.
So they now back to this to understand. They of course they have different assumptions, different levels of
hmm
complexity, and different
hmm
sort of level of unknown parameters in some
Yes.
sense. If you want
Yes.
to, at least they don't correspond to one biological system, any biological system completely. So how should we think about this? This is sort of, it's almost like they're experimental objects in their own right, just to understand what the model is, the behavior of the model.
Um, yes. So I mean, one uh, popular term these days is digital twin.
Mm.
And I wouldn't call all these models digital twins, but
So what for
we
you is a digital twin then? Since not all of them qualified.
it's maybe not a term that I'm all that easy or confident with about. So I don't think I would
Okay, that's okay.
wouldn't want to go on air here. I know we have in the our buildings on model paper we touch upon the digital twin.
Mm.
I mean, when you look at it in a let's say production or in an industrial setting, it is often a model that is of sufficient quality that if you want to make some modifications to your production line, you can actually test it in that model, and it will, with very high reliability, tell you whether
So
that's
it's
going to work, whether that's going to improve your productive output, or whether it's going to cause problems. And so but I mean, we are building these models. They are complex beasts in their own right. So something like the I would probably argue that the Potjans-Diesmann model, with its 8 populations, is sort of the last level that you can implement by hand. I think the Python script is about 400 lines long. And that you can also still manage by hand, where you could manually do parameter adjustments and things like this. But if you come to models such as the multi-area model, or this 4x4 square millimeter mesocircuit model, you get to a level of complexity of the models themselves, just the network structure, but also the tools that you need around to be able to successfully simulate those models, that they become experimental objects in their own right. And then you get also to this question: where does the term scientific infrastructure start? But I think I would put the infrastructure label more on the software that you use than for the simulation of these models.
Oh, exactly. So the
Consider
simulation.
the models themselves as complex artifacts, but those are also artifacts then that need, I'd say, maintenance over time. If you think of an experimental neurophysiology lab, you have people who take care of the animals there and keep them happy, and a lot of work goes in there. And in a way, particularly as software packages on which you build evolve, you also need to make small adaptations to your models. And if it's only little things such as that NumPy now spells infinity with lowercase inf, and in the
Okay.
past you could also spell it with uppercase inf,
Okay.
means that from time to time you need to go into your code and make little adjustments. So it's really things that need maintenance over time.
Because the software, like this special like software like Neuron and Nest, like with simulation tools, but also models like the Potjans-Diesmann and also these other models, they are going to be used. They have a longer lifetime than the hardware they're running on.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, hardware today has a roughly lifetime of 5 years. You won't get, I mean, many boxes can run longer, but you won't get maintenance contracts that go out beyond 5 years. And clearly also the software is evolving over time. But generally, software seems to be much more long-lived than hardware. And can ask the question a bit: what does it mean that hardware lives for 5 years? I mean, that's the physical computer that you're running on. But a lot of software that you could run on, don't know exactly where the cutoff would be, but if you could run it 20 years ago on some sort of Pentium CPU, you can probably still run it today, because they're in the instruction set architecture of CPUs. And so a lot of new things have been added, but very few old things have been removed. So in a way, it's the performance has become much greater, but conceptually, a lot of the hardware is still the same.
So I mean, this of course, this with the large scale models, that has also changed the. I mean, if you want to run some of these large scale
Mm-hmm.
models like comfortably, and maybe if you want to explore the parameter space, you often
Mm-hmm.
you would like to have supercomputers, right, to
Yes.
be able to run it many times, and that sort of is, of course, there's a practical question: who has access to supercomputers? And then it's also this thing of doing simulations in the cloud, which is
Mm-hmm.
not free typically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what is your are you a cloud person now when you do simulations with Nest, or how what's the culture? It for me to
Yes.
run things in the clouds is not something I'm used to.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
very little feeling of how much it's going to cost and how long I can run things, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's on my
Yeah.
laptop. At least I know I can estimate how long time things will take.
Yes. So uh, for, I mean, most of my recent papers, the actual simulations that we had in there were done on supercomputers, where we had compute time grants. And that were often computers that we also used in development. So we were quite familiar with them and could use them efficiently. Um, but and I haven't used commercial cloud providers for that. I think there are quite a number of people who are doing that as well. But if you, I mean, we don't really have huge research budgets to buy much compute time out there. So if you can write a grant application and receive access to some of the larger supercomputers in Europe,
Mm.
uh, that's a more attractive option. And uh, but one important challenge then also is that you don't just need a naked a supercomputer. Typically, software builds on several layers on a certain stack. So you need to make sure that you have certain libraries available. You typically also need a bit of Python wrapping on top these days. So general Python interpreter, and then maybe NumPy and a few other things. Um, if you want to do large models, you need to do that by distributing your network over several compute nodes in a simulator. So you need parallelization libraries such as MPI that can transport spikes between the different compute boxes in a supercomputer. And when you then have so many different parts and pieces that all need to interact properly, you again have a large risk of version conflicts and instabilities. And there, the eBrains research infrastructure, so the European brain research infrastructure that evolved out of the Human Brain Project, has really gone to um, great lengths and made very systematic efforts to create very stable software stacks. So twice a year they create a new eBrains release where they have very careful, where they sort of put in all the auxiliary libraries and so that you would need, carefully test that that works for all the software that they are providing, such as Nest Brine, Elephant for simulation, LFPy for Neuron, etc., to provide you with an environment that is internally consistent and stable, and they maintain these stable versions. And you can test them out on virtual machines if you just create an eBrains account.
Mm.
Then you have a bit limitations. but they also provide at least technical possibilities to run on supercomputers. And then you can take this very carefully crafted environment, put it on a supercomputer that should significantly reduce the threshold for running also complex setups on supercomputers. You'll still, in most cases, have to write your own compute time grant. So you'll have to bring the time, and they can help you with the setup.
So how is it with like the e-brains? Who can everyone become a user there? I should know this, but
Um, with very small limitations, I
yeah,
would say, which are based on international sanctions and such things.
yeah. Mm.
Uh,
Okay.
uh, Essentially, everyone can become a user. I don't know if they, for legal reasons, have a 13-year age limit or so,
Okay.
or even an 18-year, because
So if you have
it's
a
just for
prodigy, you
organization so
yeah,
much easier
yeah.
if you don't have to worry about minors.
Mm,
And uh, there are a lot of, so if you are affiliated with a university or a well-established research organization, there is a very high likelihood that your
mm,
institution is whitelisted by eBrain. So if you just sign up there, that should
mm,
work automatically. If not, I don't know the precise processes these days, but there might be a bit of a check.
So that's a very nice way to get started to use
Yes.
these tools, and then if you then want to do larger simulations, then you might have to get
Yeah.
supercomputer time
Yeah.
from somewhere
Yeah.
else, and
Yes.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yes.
yeah, I'll make a link on the webpage.
Yeah.
So also in terms of the culture, I mean, you've been in this game for a long time. I remember when I sort of when I tried to
Mm-hmm.
reproduce some of these models back in the days. This is like in the 90s. And then I read well, like one of the person I reached out to got really annoyed and said, "Well, you have to make your own model. Why should I?" So this idea of sharing a model was even was like that was sort of a was almost
Yes.
impertinent to ask
Yes.
for that. So that's
Yes.
of course that
Yes.
makes very little sense, because if you cannot reproduce it, or
Yeah.
then it's not really science. But I guess this there is sort of like a I guess the models has become much larger part of neuroscience, like computational neuroscience, and this
Yes.
thing of using models, and that is sort of and sharing models, and
Mm-hmm.
building
Mm-hmm.
on each other's models
Yeah.
is that is certainly come a long way. Uh, Also, is this like this Potjans-Diesmann model? Is that could be that's probably also used in teaching or
Yes. So I I think in my courses I've more stuck to the simpler models, and
mm,
then just pointed to the Potjans-Diesmann model. But it is of a size where you can. So it has about 80,000 neurons. If you have a really strong laptop, you can run it. But and so it's of a size where you can still in a course do, let's say, parameter exploration,
mm,
or things like that. If you went on to the multi-area model with its 4.5 million neurons,
mm,
the compute resources that you would need get a bit excessive, uh, maybe for letting students run lots of individual experiments
mm,
uh,
mm.
with that. But, mm,
So good. So I thought I think at the end of the your book chapter,
mhm.
then you actually come with some like concrete advice for listeners who build models. So maybe I can make a list. I wrote a list here, so I can just read it
Yeah,
to you, and then
yeah,
you so you
yeah,
don't have to remember it. It's
yeah.
and then you can just comment. One is sort of like when you start making a model, design for sharing from day one.
Hmm.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're the it is this point. If you at least have at the back of your mind that at some point you will want to share this model, you will hopefully from the start, think a little bit more about the structure of your model scripts. You will, from the beginning, put in a bit more documentation so that getting to a really polished version that you can put out and that others then in particular can have benefits from will be a lot less work. If you write something that just works for yourself, then it's going to be with limited uh, um, documentation, obscure variable names. I've sometimes, as a reviewer, seen scientific software, then scripts or implementations where functions took 20 different arguments and they were all just positional arguments. So it's absolutely non-robust code. Um, if you start out like that and then think that once the paper is published and you want to put out your model for others to see, you're going to find the time and the energy to clean that all up. Chances of success, I think, are very limited. Plus, it's anyways, and that's more with a view to supervisors, it's anyways mostly going to be your PhD student who did the work. And if he or she then has left and you want to polish that code, you'll have an even harder time. So try to keep it tidy from the start.
Yeah. A second thing, I think, which you also suggest is sort of like aim for a clear separation between the model and the simulator, right? So that you can write describe the model in a simulator independent way, if possible.
Yes. So if you can create your model, for example, in a you can do it in Nest, then or even better if you can write it down in Pine, then you know that you can move it between different simulators. And then if you want to add components that are new, and I mean in science we always want to do new things. Experimentalists will always be tweaking their setups a bit to measure things that no one else has measured before. And so you might want to put in different equations for your neuron models. There are also several markup languages, both from the NeuroML universe, but also in NestML we have an abstract way of specifying new model equations, which are then automatically converted to C++ code and can both for Nest and could also be converted into code that runs with other simulators. If you do that, you are already then you have this division between model and simulator. You should probably also read up in that Einevol 2019 et al. 2019 Neuron paper about this separation concept. With the Brine simulator, I'm sometimes, when I see actual code implementations, a bit skeptical because there you write your model equations in so as part of your Python code, and then that's quickly compiled. That makes it very flexible. But I sometimes have the impression that one may end up with codes and script that are not very portable or would actually require considerable effort for manual porting.
Okay, a third one, use curated repositories and declarative formats where possible. Is that, I'm not quite sure if that was just some, at least use curated repositories.
Yes, and that would be places such as ModelDB and open source Brain, eBrain's knowledge graph. I mean, what is very common these days is that papers come with a link to some GitHub repository. And some of these GitHub repositories are very well maintained, maybe have been living over a long time, have collected several models, so the output from an entire research group. But others also look like, okay, we set up this repository here and put the code there after the paper was accepted. And when the PhD student leaves science, it's going to stay there. It's going to be available. That's good. Better than nothing. But it will not be tended. If you have something like open source brain, where you have people who curate, so you send things there, someone will take a look at it, will make sure that it can be run, and then keep it in a place where others can also find it from a, let's say, computational neuroscience perspective, because on GitHub you're together with everything. But on open source brain or ModelDB, eBrain's knowledge graph, you have dedicated resources for neuroscience. So if computational neuroscientists come and search for something, they'll much more likely find you there.
Okay, so I guess an overall perspective that modelers should have is that you should think of it as something that might outlive your current hardware and maybe even your lab and even yourself.
I mean, a colleague has recently, in some review process, been asked if he had started to think about how to preserve his tool and model making legacy beyond his retirement. So the question really, how do you pass on then to the next generation? And I think there, if you can do your work in the context of a community, that can carry on. I mean, not everything will survive. Certain things also maybe at some point are no longer scientifically really particularly relevant, become more interesting for historians of science. But if you do it in a group, I think you have much better chances that your legacy will be carried on. And actually, an interesting point, one of the directors of this Käthe Hamburger Kolleg, where I spent my sabbatical, has recently received a long-term grant to build sort of a museum of scientific software. So looking forward to that.
I guess that might be a virtual museum, or
well, it's eventually planned to be also connected to a brick and mortar museum, but
very good.
Should be easy to have virtual exhibits there.
Yeah. Well, I this is sort of thanks a lot for I think
sure.
well, this is a very important work for the community to sort of to make this reproducible and to do this. Of course, it's sometimes more fun to work on new projects and do like quick and dirty to see if it works, but at some point we have to do. That's not sufficient if you want to build a solid foundation and a solid legacy. So I don't know if there's anything we have forgotten to talk about.
Now I could put in a pitch for next year's NEST conference, again, a virtual conference that's going to take place on the 16th and 17th of June. And we'll post more about that on the NEST simulator websites and mailing lists and such.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Hans Eckbert.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.